Read the contracts, Sarah. They're boring, but they decide who survives.
Look, I'm not going to pretend this was some cinematic moment where rain was pouring and violins were sobbing in the background. It was a Tuesday. The dishwasher was running its second cycle because Sarah never scraped the plates properly. And somewhere in the living room, her phone was pinging with notifications like a slot machine that never pays out. That's when she delivered her Oscar-worthy line, the one she'd probably been workshopping in her head for weeks. "Go ahead and leave. You won't survive a week without me." She said it with this wine-soaked, perfectly practiced smile that had won her countless arguments, manipulated her way through family dinners, and convinced her Instagram followers she was living some aspirational dream life. Her breath smelled like the $15 Chardonnay she pretended was 30, and she stood there with her arms crossed, waiting for me to crumble like I was supposed to. Like some pathetic sitcom husband who couldn't figure out how to work the washing machine without her divine intervention. Here's the thing about people who threaten you with your own supposed inadequacy. They genuinely believe it. Sarah had spent the better part of 3 years casually mentioning how I'd be lost without her, how she was the glue holding our life together, how I was basically a functional man-child who'd probably starve or wear mismatched socks if she wasn't around to supervise my existence. She'd joke about it at parties, turning my supposed helplessness into cocktail hour entertainment. "He doesn't even know where we keep the nice towels," she'd laugh, and everyone would chuckle because it's funny when a wife gently roasts her husband, right? It's adorable. It's relatable content. Except she actually believed every word, and that belief had calcified into this unshakable certainty that I was nothing without her. So when I reached into my pocket, pulled out my keys, and set them on the kitchen counter with the kind of deliberate calm you'd use when placing a chess piece, I could see confusion flicker across her face. Front door key, truck key, the little brass one for the safe in the bedroom closet where she kept her grandmother's jewelry, and I kept documents she never bothered to read. I lined them up like soldiers, each one a small goodbye, each one a period at the end of a sentence I'd been writing in my head for months. No suitcase, no dramatic speech, no throwing clothes into garbage bags while screaming about betrayal and wasted years. You can't get applause for a quiet exit because nobody's watching closely enough to notice the performance. And honestly, that's exactly how I wanted it. Walking out of that house felt weirdly clean, like finally scratching an itch that had been bothering me for so long I'd almost forgotten what it felt like not to be irritated. She expected the whole production, the yelling match where we'd rehash every petty argument from the past 5 years, the tears and begging and the maybe we can work it out conversation that would inevitably end with me sleeping on the couch and pretending things could get better. She wanted the show, the drama, the content she could later spin into a sympathetic narrative where I was the villain and she was the wronged woman picking up the pieces. I gave her none of that. I gave her a full refund in silence, returned her investment in this relationship without so much as a receipt or an explanation. She'd always joked that I was boring, and you know what? She wasn't wrong. I am boring. Gloriously, magnificently boring. I'm the guy who reads the terms and conditions. I'm the guy who color codes his file folders and actually knows where the tax returns from 2019 are stored. I'm the guy who would rather spend a Friday night organizing the garage than hitting some overpriced bar where everyone's shouting over music that's too loud and drinking cocktails that cost more than a decent steak. Sarah used to roll her eyes at my spreadsheets, at my habit of reading consumer reports before making any purchase over $50, at the way I'd spend Sunday mornings quietly sipping coffee and reviewing our budget while she scrolled through influencer accounts and added things to her online shopping cart that we definitely didn't need. But that night, boring looked different. Boring looked like a man who'd finally run out of patience and started running on plans instead of feelings. Boring looked like someone who'd spent months quietly, methodically preparing for this exact moment while everyone around him assumed he was too checked out or too comfortable or too whatever to actually do anything about his situation. There's this weird assumption in our culture that if you're not constantly expressing your emotions, you're not feeling them. Like quiet people are just NPCs wandering through life without any internal narrative. But let me tell you something about boring people. We notice everything. We file it away. We wait. The real work had started about 8 months earlier, right after that dinner party at her father's house. We were sitting at this massive dining table that seats 12, but only ever has 6 people around it because who actually has that many friends? Robert Martinez, her father, was holding court like he always did. talking about market opportunities and portfolio diversification and all the stuff that rich people discuss to remind everyone else they're rich. Sarah's boss, David Graham, was there too. This slick private equity guy who wore expensive watches and cheaper ethics. At some point, the conversation turned to me, specifically to what I brought to the table, and Sarah, emboldened by her third glass of whatever pretentious vintage her father had selected, basically implied I was decorative. Not in those words, obviously, she was too smart for that. But she did this thing where she'd talk about us, and somehow only her accomplishments would get mentioned. Our investment strategy, which was really her father's that I'd quietly improved. Our real estate moves, which were really my research and due diligence that she'd taken credit for. Our financial stability, which she somehow attributed to her career in marketing at a company that was about as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. And then David, because he's the kind of guy who thinks he's charming when he's actually just rude, made some joke about how I was the foundation while Sarah was the penthouse, and everyone laughed. Everyone except me, because I was too busy doing the mental math on exactly how screwed they'd all be if the foundation decided to relocate. That's when I started really planning. Not out of spite exactly, though I'd be lying if I said spite wasn't part of the fuel mixture, but more out of this crystal clear realization that I was in a relationship with someone who genuinely believed I was replaceable, upgradable. Like I was some kind of base model appliance she could swap out for a nicer version once her stock options vested. And you know what? If that's how she saw me, then I had absolutely zero guilt about treating our shared finances like the complex infrastructure project they actually were. The meetings with lawyers and bankers were, honestly, kind of hilarious. I'd show up in my regular work clothes, nothing fancy, carrying a folder with color-coded tabs, because of course I had color-coded tabs, and these professionals would look at me like I was either a criminal mastermind or the most organized person they'd ever met. There was this one banker, older guy named Richard, who'd probably seen every financial maneuver in the book, and when I laid out what I wanted to do, he actually smiled. Not a big smile, just this tiny little twitch at the corner of his mouth. And he said, "Son, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've never seen someone weaponize a limited liability corporation quite this elegantly." I took that as a compliment. The mechanics were pretty simple, actually, which is what made it beautiful. Everything Sarah thought was ours was structured in ways that made perfect sense when we were a functional couple, but became absolutely catastrophic the moment I removed myself from the equation. Joint guarantees that suddenly weren't so joint anymore. Insurance riders that only worked if both names remained on the policy. Lines of credit that depended on my income verification and excellent credit score, which, spoiler alert, I wasn't planning to keep sharing. Every single document had these little clauses, these tiny legal footnotes that nobody ever reads because they're boring and technical, and who has time for that? And every single one of them was now a small bomb with my hand on the detonator. Sarah never asked what I was doing, not once. I'd come home from a meeting with our estate attorney, and she'd be on the couch with her laptop, editing photos of herself holding a coffee cup in front of a sunset, and she'd say something like, "How was your day, babe?" in that voice people use when they're asking, but not really asking, and I'd say, "Fine, just some paperwork stuff." And that would be the end of it. She trusted that I was handling the boring stuff, so she didn't have to, which was exactly what I'd been counting on. She'd even sign things sometimes, documents I'd bring home with little sticky arrows pointing to where her signature went, and she'd barely skim them. "What's this one?" she'd ask, pen already in hand. "Just updating the trust documentation," I'd say, which was technically true, and she'd sign it while scrolling through Instagram with her other hand. There was this one evening, maybe 2 months before I left, where we had a moment that would have been poignant if it wasn't so perfectly ironic. She made dinner, which was rare because cooking wasn't really her thing, and she'd opened a nice bottle of wine, and she came into my office with 2 glasses and said, "Let's celebrate adulting." She meant the fact that we had our crap together, that we owned property and had investment accounts and looked like functioning adults from the outside. We clinked glasses, and she called me her responsible, boring husband with this affectionate tone like it was a pet name, and the whole time I was thinking about the LLC formation documents I'd filed that morning. Morning Light Holdings was officially real, officially mine, and officially ready to catch everything that was about to fall when I pulled the supports out from under our shared financial life. Trigger Day was a Wednesday because, of course, it was. Wednesdays are peak boring, the absolute middle of nothing. I was sitting in a coffee shop 3 towns over with my laptop. a mediocre Americano that cost $6 for some reason, and a very specific checklist that I'd been refining for weeks. The first action item was beautifully simple: revoke my guarantor status on a package of loans tied to the house. Our house, that beautiful 3-bedroom with the renovated kitchen and the backyard that Sarah loved to photograph for her home and lifestyle content, was financed through a structure that required both of us to guarantee the debt. It was one of those things her father had set up because Robert Martinez loved complicated financial instruments the way some people love craft beer, always talking about the subtle notes and sophisticated structures. The loans weren't even primarily in our names. They were business loans tied to one of Robert's smaller LLCs, used to purchase the property as an investment that we just happened to live in. Tax advantages, he'd explained over cigars one time. The whole setup was perfectly legal and actually pretty clever, the kind of thing that saves rich people thousands in taxes. But it had one tiny, beautiful vulnerability. My signature as co-guarantor wasn't permanent. It could be revoked with proper notice to the lending institution. And that notice period, buried in Section 7.3 of an addendum I'd actually read, was exactly 14 days. Those 14 days had expired yesterday at 5 p.m. Right on schedule, one mouse click. That's all it took. I logged into the bank's online portal, navigated to the guarantor management section that probably 0.1% of customers even know exists, and clicked the button that said Revoke Guarantee. The system asked if I was sure because systems always ask if you're sure. I was sure. Then came the 2-factor authentication code sent to my phone. 6 digits. I typed them in with the same level of emotional investment I'd used to verify a Netflix password reset, and just like that, a whole scaffolding fell away. To the bank's automated systems, this was just routine administrative maintenance. To Robert Martinez's financial structure, this was an earthquake. Because here's the thing about guarantees: they're insurance policies, the bank's safety net. Remove one guarantor from a 2-guarantor loan, and suddenly the bank's risk assessment changes dramatically. Suddenly they start asking uncomfortable questions like, hey, can the remaining guarantor actually cover this if things go sideways? And in this case, with Robert's LLC showing some creative accounting that looked great on paper, but not so great under actual scrutiny, the answer was going to be somewhere between probably not and definitely not. My phone buzzed about 4 hours later. Not Sarah's number, but Robert's, the man himself calling me directly, which almost never happened. I let it go to voicemail because I was in the middle of lunch, and also because the pettiness of making him wait felt deeply satisfying. When I finally listened to the message, I had to replay it 3 times because it was that good. His voice had this quality I'd never heard before, something between panic and rage. What the hell did you do? The bank just called us. They're saying there's a problem with the guarantor structure on the Elmwood property. They're saying you withdrew your guarantee. They're talking about calling the loan. What did you make Sarah do? Call me back immediately. What did I make Sarah do? That line deserved a standing ovation. Because in Robert's world, there was no possible scenario where boring, reliable, decorative me had independently decided to do anything. Obviously, Sarah must have forced my hand somehow. Must have done something so catastrophic that I'd reacted in this dramatic fashion. The idea that I might have been planning this for months, that I might have been several chess moves ahead while they were all still arguing about whether we were playing chess or checkers. That didn't even compute. I didn't call him back. Not immediately, anyway. I finished my lunch, which was a pretty decent turkey sandwich, and I thought about how funny it was that all of this had started with something as simple as revoking a guarantee. I hadn't stolen anything, hadn't committed fraud, hadn't done anything illegal or even particularly aggressive. I'd simply removed my name from a document, exercised my legal right to stop guaranteeing someone else's debt, and the entire structure had started cracking. Sarah called next, about 20 minutes after her father's voicemail. Her tone was different, less angry, more confused. Babe, my dad's freaking out about something with the house loans. He says you did something. Can you call him and fix it? I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. I could hear music in the background. That generic pop stuff she always played when she was getting ready to go out. She genuinely had no idea what was happening. She thought this was a clerical error, a simple miscommunication that boring, reliable me would clear up with a phone call and an apology. I texted her back instead of calling. Not a misunderstanding. Talk to your lawyer. 3 seconds of typing, years of consequences. Next on my checklist was the insurance rider, specifically the business type policy that covered the property and was tied to Robert's LLC structure. The policy had both our names on it as interested parties, which in insurance speak means we both had skin in the game. I canceled my portion on a Thursday morning, right after my second cup of coffee. The insurance company's website was actually pretty decent. 4 clicks and 1 electronic signature. The system asked me to confirm that I understood the implications. I clicked, yes, I understand, with the same level of concern I'd have clicking through a software license agreement. What happened next was automatic and beautiful. The insurance company's algorithm immediately recalculated the risk profile. 1 guarantor instead of 2, 1 income stream instead of 2. The premium went up, obviously, but more importantly, the default protection flipped entirely to Sarah's name. She was now the primary contact, the primary payer, the primary person responsible for making sure this thing didn't lapse. Responsibility had been transferred like a hot potato, except instead of a potato, it was a monthly bill she'd never seen before because I'd always handled it. Meanwhile, the ferry of funds into Morning Light Holdings was proceeding exactly on schedule. I'd set this up weeks ago, these quiet little transfers that looked completely legitimate because they were completely legitimate. Money from joint accounts getting redistributed according to the lovely paperwork that Sarah had signed without reading. Assets moving from places where they were shared to places where they were very much not shared. People who think forms are tiny reptiles tend to get bitten eventually. There's this whole category of people who treat paperwork like it's beneath them, like reading the fine print is for suckers. They sign things because signing things is what you do to make the boring parts of life go away faster. They don't realize that every signature is a promise, every checkbox is a commitment. Sarah's phone must have looked like a Christmas tree on fire, all those notifications lighting up at once. I wasn't there to see it because I was staying at my sister Maya's place, but I could picture it perfectly. Her phone sitting on the nightstand, buzzing and pinging while she was probably still half asleep. Robert had apparently spent the previous evening on the phone with various financial institutions. Based on the voicemail evidence I was collecting, he'd gone through several emotional phases. First was confusion. Surely there's been some mistake. Then came anger. How dare someone disrupt my carefully constructed arrangements? And finally, somewhere around 3 a.m, based on the timestamp, he'd arrived at panic, which is where wealthy people end up when they realize their money might actually be at risk. By voicemail number 4, things had deteriorated significantly. Sarah, what the hell did you do to make him leave? The bank is talking about accelerating the loan. Do you understand what that means? That means they want all the money now. They're saying your husband withdrew his guarantor status and now the whole structure is compromised. Call me immediately. Sarah called me at 7:15 in the morning. I was having breakfast with Maya, enjoying some decent scrambled eggs and trying to explain to her 6-year-old why cereal isn't suitable for every single meal, when my phone started vibrating across the table. I glanced at the screen, saw Sarah's name, went back to my eggs. Maya raised an eyebrow. Not answering? Nothing she has to say is more important than these eggs, I said. She called again and again. By the 4th call, my nephew thought it was hilarious, this game where my phone kept buzzing and I kept ignoring it. Then came the texts. Please call me. We need to talk about the house. My dad is freaking out and I don't understand what's happening. And finally, this isn't funny anymore. That last one made me actually laugh because it implied there was a phase where this was funny, some joke we were sharing. Robert tried calling me directly around 8:30. I put him on speaker. Maya stopped loading the dishwasher to listen. Listen, I don't know what Sarah did or said to upset you, but we need to resolve this situation immediately. The bank is threatening to call the loan, which affects not just you and Sarah, but several of my business operations. This is bigger than whatever marital issue you're having. The assumption that this was about a marital spat, that I was throwing some kind of financial tantrum because my feelings were hurt, was almost adorable. Robert, I said, using his first name, I exercised my legal right to remove myself as a guarantor on loans I no longer wished to guarantee. Everything I did was properly documented and completely legal. If that creates problems for your business operations, maybe your business operations shouldn't have been dependent on your son-in-law's signature. Maya made a little ooh sound from across the kitchen. There was a pause, and I could practically hear Robert recalculating. He went with indignation mixed with condescension. You have no idea what you're doing. You're going to hurt Sarah with this little stunt. Is that what you want? I'm 34, I pointed out, and I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply declining to continue guaranteeing debt for people who've made it very clear they don't value my involvement in their lives. It seems pretty rational to me. When I finally ended the call, Maya was grinning. I've never heard you talk to him like that. I've never had a reason to. Now he's just a guy with a collapsing loan structure who's mad I'm not fixing it for him. Sarah's company, Riverside Capital Marketing Solutions, was one of those outfits that sounds way more impressive than it actually is. They specialized in marketing for mid-tier financial services companies. Sarah was good at it. She knew how to make a PowerPoint sing, how to turn dry financial data into something aspirational. But here's the thing about companies backed by private equity. They audit everything. When the ripples from my financial restructuring started spreading, when banks started making phone calls and asking uncomfortable questions, those ripples eventually hit Riverside's monthly risk assessment review. The company had extended a bridge loan to Roberts LLC about 18 months ago, one of those cozy arrangements that happen when personal relationships intersect with business. David had pushed it through, probably as a favor to Sarah. When my name disappeared from those guarantees, Riverside's automated risk monitoring system flagged the loan. Someone in risk management noticed that a key guarantor had withdrawn, escalated it to their supervisor, who escalated it to the CFO. The CFO realized that one of their marketing directors was married to the guarantor who just pulled out, and that same director's father was the primary borrower on a loan that was now looking significantly less secure. The payroll wobble happened 3 days later. Not a full disaster, just a delay. An email from HR saying there was a minor processing issue, and direct deposits would be delayed until end of business. To regular employees, this seemed like a technical glitch. But to anyone who understands how payroll actually works, a delay is a massive red flag. It means cash flow problems. Sarah had been trading on what I called the stable husband brand for years. In professional environments, especially in financial services, people notice things like marital stability, home ownership, the appearance of having your life together. When you're married with a nice house and a spouse who has a solid job and good credit, people subconsciously categorize you as lower risk. But brands expire. Word travels fast in professional circles. The information circulating was that Sarah Martinez's husband had walked out, her father's loans were in trouble, and there were questions about some bridge financing that Riverside had extended to a related party. The office whispers started. Someone would be talking near the coffee machine, and the conversation would pause when Sarah walked by. People who used to stop by her desk suddenly had urgent things to do elsewhere. David started being weirdly formal with her. Lots of, let's put that in writing, and can you send me an email documenting that? Which is corporate speak for I'm building a paper trail. Then came the package. According to my friend Derek, whose girlfriend worked nearby, Sarah opened a padded envelope at her desk on Tuesday morning. Inside was a USB drive with a sticky note saying, "Play me," in printed letters. The video file was labeled dinner_march15.mp4. What happened on March 15th was that dinner party at Robert's house where Sarah had had too much wine and too much confidence. The video was from Robert's security system. Good quality, clear audio. Sarah watched herself on screen, heard her own voice saying things she'd probably convinced herself she'd never actually said out loud. The jokes about being the real breadwinner, the casual mentions of how I was just along for the ride, the moment where she'd said, "Honestly, if we split up, I'd be fine. Better than fine, probably. He'd be the one struggling to figure out basic life stuff." Then, the video cut to black, and text appeared, white letters on black background formatted like a legal document. Addendum 4C from our property trust agreement, the section that specifically outlined the conditions under which guarantor status could be revoked and assets could be redistributed. The section she'd signed without reading. The text stayed on screen long enough to read twice. Then the video ended with a final screen. Boring people read contracts. According to Derek's girlfriend, Sarah sat at her desk for a full minute after the video ended, staring at her screen. Then she unplugged the USB drive, shoved it in her desk drawer, and spent 20 minutes in the bathroom. When she came back, her eyes were red and her makeup was smudged. The HR memo came the next day. Not termination, that would be legally risky, but a carefully worded email about managing personal circumstances that may impact professional performance, and suggesting Sarah might want to consider taking personal leave. Corporate speak for, "You're becoming a reputational risk." The foreclosure notice arrived on Thursday morning, delivered by certified mail. Thick envelope, lots of documents. Notice of default and intent to foreclose in big letters at the top. The house was going into foreclosure because loan obligations hadn't been met and the security structure had fundamentally changed. 90 days to resolve it, or the property would be sold at auction. 90 days she absolutely didn't have the resources to navigate. She called me. I declined. She called again and again. By the fourth call, I stepped into a hallway at work and watched my phone vibrate, watching her name appear and disappear. Then texts. Please pick up. We need to talk about the house. I know you're angry, but this is serious. My lawyer says you're the only one who can fix this. Please, I'm begging you. I typed, talk to your lawyer. I'm sure they'll explain your options. Hit send, put my phone on silent. 2 days later, she showed up at my truck. I was leaving work when I saw her standing next to it. She looked terrible. Hair undone, minimal makeup, yoga pants, and sweatshirt. For Sarah, this was basically a cry for help. We need to talk, she said. Please, just 5 minutes. You owe me that much. I don't owe you anything, I said, unlocking my truck. But you can talk while I load my stuff. She launched into this whole speech about how we could fix this, restructure the loans, make everything go back to how it was. Marriage counseling, communication problems, learning from mistakes. It was well practiced, hit all the right emotional notes. Sarah, I said finally, do you remember what you said at your father's dinner party? About how you'd be fine if we split up, better than fine, and I'd be the one struggling? She opened her mouth, but I kept talking. You were right. You should be fine. You're smart, capable, you have a career. The problem is, your version of being fine was built on my signature on documents you never bothered to read. She tried to interrupt, but I was done listening. I need you to stop contacting me. Work with your lawyer and your father. Everything I did was legal, documented, signed by both of us. You just never bothered to read what you were signing because you trusted boring me was handling the boring stuff. Well, I handled it. She started crying. Real tears. Please, she whispered. Please don't do this. I know I messed up. Took you for granted. But we can fix this. We can fix us. There is no us, I said. There's you dealing with your situation and me moving forward. Those are separate things now. She grabbed my arm desperately. I can't lose everything. The house, my job. My dad is furious. David's talking about letting me go. I can't do this alone. You told me you'd be fine alone, I reminded her gently, removing her hand. You told everyone you were the penthouse and I was just the foundation. Well, penthouses are great until the foundation leaves. Then they're just expensive rooms falling through empty air. I got in my truck. She stood there trying to think of something else to say. I started the engine and rolled down the window one last time. You should read contracts, Sarah. They're boring, but they're important. That's the whole point of boring things. They matter. I rolled the window up slowly and pulled out of the parking space, checking my mirrors, using my turn signal. The drive to Maya's took 20 minutes. I thought about normal things, groceries, apartment hunting, work deadlines. When I pulled into Maya's driveway, I sat for a moment, feeling the engine's vibration through the steering wheel. There's something satisfying about a well-maintained machine doing exactly what it's supposed to do. That's what I've been in the marriage, a well-maintained machine keeping everything running while being taken for granted. Now I was still a well-maintained machine, but running on my own terms. Boring men don't implode when their lives fall apart. We don't have public meltdowns or post cryptic messages. We file things. We read contracts. We understand that the boring parts, paperwork, procedures, documentation, those are the parts that actually matter when everything else falls away. And when it's time to leave, we don't burn bridges or slam doors. We just set down our keys, walk away clean, and let the natural consequences play out. The truck hummed its reliable song. Somewhere behind me, Sarah was probably calling her lawyer or her father. Whatever she was doing, it didn't involve me anymore. And that, finally, was exactly how it should